Welcome to Ecclesia Principles, a biblical strategy for believers to engage in God's design for government with Ray Eppard.
Hello, glad you could join us again today. We're continuing to study what I call the Ecclesia Principle, understanding justice and equality on a societal scale. Now, we're getting into some stuff with it, but I would encourage you to begin to read, particularly through Deuteronomy and Leviticus, some of those books that we dislike to read the most. But that's where God actually gets into the nitty-gritty with some of these things about justice and equality. We don't think about it because their style of life was so different from ours. And so we don't process it. You have to stop and think about it a little while. And that's really what we're doing with some of this. It's this particular passage that I'm using every time is one of the best. It's expanded throughout certain parts of Leviticus and gets into more detail on some of the things that I'm talking about. But the conciseness of these two verses that gives us an overview of what the year of Jubilee was all about. That concept, the year of Jubilee, ultimately was designed to have justice, but also have the ultimate objective of equality. Now, equality largely has to do with process, but there is, on a societal level, there is an objective, and this passage includes that. And so we're going to be talking about it a little bit more. And today we're going to look at one of the biggest things that it was designed to create within their society. And so let's go ahead and read Leviticus 25, 14, and 15. And it says, talking about the year of Jubilee, and if you sell anything to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor's hand, you shall not oppress one another. That is the key phrase in this. You shall not oppress one another. That is the objective. Everything else is logistical details. That's the bottom line. But he institutes this in order to achieve the lack of oppression. You shall not oppress one another, verse 15. According to the number of years after the Jubilee, you shall buy from your neighbor. And according to the number of years of crops, he shall sell to you. Now, with this, let's take this again, because ultimately, now God did have a distinction. You can read it later on in Leviticus 25, where he talked about houses within walled cities. But then those would not be returned. But a house on a farm, if you would, that was to be considered part of the land, and therefore could not be lost. It would be returned at the Jubilee. In other words, they couldn't lose their home. They could not lose their home. Now, if you would, the concept with the way God set things up, those within the walled city still had land out here. So for lack of a better phrase, that was why this one would be allowed to be lost, because they still had this. And in that dynamic, God was making sure that they still had opportunity. They still had opportunity. You see, the maintaining of opportunity is a key thing with oppression. Now, some of you may know that I beat this next drum kind of regularly, and that is that when it comes to oppression, when it comes to well-being of families, one of the absolute worst things economically is inflation. Inflation does more to separate the haves from the have-nots than any other thing. Economic policy that creates growth, you'll hear many people, oh, just the rich are getting richer. That's kind of a process that's going to happen no matter what system you have in place. Some people are better at seeing opportunities and taking advantages of them than others are. That's just a reality of life. However, the bottom line is, in times of inflation, like we are currently in, significant inflation hinders the opportunity of people. That at that point, it is taking more money, and I'll deal with this from our time frame here, not their time frame, because and the concept that I'm using it from in Leviticus 25 is when God said, "You'll sell it according to the number of crops." It wasn't based on what they were just willing to pay for it, because what they would be willing to pay for it could create inflation, and so number of crops, because God was trying to deal with, in a manner of speaking, an inflationary process and hold that in check so that people would not be oppressed, because inflation oppresses the poor and the middle class. That's what it does. Because if you're trying to get ahead, if there's, let's say there's a family, the husband, wife, 2.2 children, and so, they've got a small starter home, but they're looking to have a bigger home, a nicer home. But then inflation comes along. Well, now groceries are costing a lot more. Gas is costing a lot more. Clothes are costing more. Everything that it takes to live costs more. And the thing of it is with this, now money that at a different time they could have been setting aside to improve their life, they can't do that, or they can't do as much of it anymore. So it takes longer for them to achieve that goal because of inflation. Now, here's the thing that so often people forget is that where does that extra money go? That extra money continues to go upstream until it gets up here at the very top. And that's where that money lands. That's where it lands. And if you would, in times of inflation, and this is always kind of irks me, because during times of economic prosperity, you have a group of people, just the rich are getting richer, rich are getting richer. Well, the bottom line is, everybody's rising. But in a time of inflation, there is separation. The rich really are getting richer, and the middle class and poor are worse off. They have less opportunity. They have less opportunity in that situation, which creates the opportunity for more economic oppression. But during times of inflation, you haven't hardly heard anybody over the last 2 years talking about how the rich are getting richer in this environment. That same group, their mouth is shut on this subject. But this is the time that it's happening. Because my personal opinion, I cannot say for certain, I do not know their motives, but the bottom line is I think they really want that division, because ultimately they are opposed to us being a democratic republic. They really want a hierarchy of people, a group of elite that runs everything, and everyone else is dependent upon the government. Look at the processes that were put in place during COVID. Everything was designed to make people more and more dependent upon the government, subservient to the government. And for lack of a better phrase, it has removed opportunities from people. I'm not here thinking, well, there are no opportunities. No, there are opportunities. But the bottom line is policies that do not take into account ensuring that there are opportunities become oppressive. They become oppressive. And typically, they become oppressive in the name of we're going to take care of you. We're going to take care of you. Because what is human nature? Human nature is not a good thing by and large. Thank God a whole lot of people rise above our worst nature. But the most base level is, if I can get that for free or I can work for it, I'll take it for free. And then I'll just do what I want. And ultimately, I mean, the situation that we have right now, where many, particularly restaurants is probably one of the biggest things that you can see this in. How many restaurants are closed one day a week? They have cut their hours back significantly. Some of them have closed entirely, but almost all of them have trimmed back. Very few haven't. But that being the case, why is that? Where did all the people go that were keeping it open before? And the thing of it is, it's not that they're shutting back and closing early because there's not enough business. You see signs on door after door: staff issues, closed very typically Mondays around here, closed Monday because of staffing, short help, so forth and so on. I've actually walked into restaurants and been told, hey, listen, we don't have hardly enough people today. It's going to take us longer. You're welcome to stay, or you can go somewhere else if you like. Being told that on the upfront side. Where did these people go that were doing these jobs? And the thing of it is, they're the minimum wage and different things, it has been raised. But the policies that have been put into place, it might feel like a lot of people are, well, I'm doing better off because I got this much money and I'm not having to work with this much. Because a lot of those COVID checks, that's gone. But a lot of the regulations for unemployment and so forth got changed, and those things are still the same. How much you've got to do to go ahead and continue to get a check, or you go work for a little bit and then you can quit and then you get a check again. Those dynamics that were put in place during COVID, that is what is largely limiting our economy today. Supply chain issues, all of those things largely are the byproduct of policy. And ultimately, they are designed to limit opportunity. Because the bottom line is, if somebody's giving you a check for free, then there's going to be a limit on what that is. Hopes, aspirations will be limited. God, in the year of Jubilee, was ensuring that opportunity was there. There was a cap, if you would, on what the lender could give. There was a minimum that they had to meet. And with that, it left the individual in a position that they could better themselves, they could further their situation, and they were not removed from that. Because what you have right now, and you can look at the numbers, renting versus home ownership is skyrocketing. And that's not a good thing for opportunity. Join us again tomorrow. God bless you.